Welcome to the Charity Matters podcast. Mr. Rogers' mother said, always look for the helpers. I'm Heidi Johnson, nonprofit founder, lifelong helper, and your host. I've been interviewing the helpers for a decade with my blog, and I'm excited to finally be sharing these inspiring conversations with our new podcast. Join me as we learn the challenges and stories of innovators, entrepreneurs, and modern-day heroes who set out to solve the problems of humanity. Today, our guest is Eyvette Jones-Johnson, the founder of Urban Possibilities. I'm so excited to share her amazing journey and our inspiring conversation. Hi, Eyvette.
Well, hi there. How are you?
I'm great. It's so nice to meet you.
So nice to meet you, too.
I'm excited to kind of hear your story. And I don't know what she told you about Charity Matters and kind of what.
Well, I looked at the video on your website, and you speaking says it all.
Oh.
Really, I felt your passion and your heart when it comes to this, and that's what made me say yes immediately.
Oh, thank you.
And Jen as well. But, that I do understand because, I was a television producer for 15 years. So I'm always curious about people's stories and how they had these turning points in their lives.
Yep.
And jumping into starting a nonprofit is huge.
Huge, right? It is huge. You do not wake up and start one of these. You do not wake up and start a business that relies on the kindness of others.
Right.
It is an innately flawed business model.
It is.
People are kind, but it is a hard model. And then today I thought, I'm just going to look a little bit more on the website. And I need to not look at your website without Kleenex because I looked at Crispin Romero's The Hero in Me poetry piece. I just clicked on one picture, just one.
Right.
And it just gutted me. It was one of the most beautiful things I've ever read in my life. So,
and that's the beauty. And I have a short piece that if you want, just to offer today from one of our students, that I think is really apropos because of the times we're in and how we're fractured and need to come together.
Amen.
And it just shows that, one of the things I've learned on this journey is that the gifts inside of us, even trauma and poverty and the worst circumstances you cannot imagine, which our students have gone through, cannot take that away. It may be buried under those things. It may have a whole lot of bricks on top of it, but it can be excavated. And when it is, there is nothing more beautiful. So that's my jam.
Right? I love that. I love that.
It is so magical for me. It has been that I gave up a career in television to do this full time. And I have been in television 15 years. So,
that is huge. And that is the story. You're jumping to my last question, by the way, with already lessons learned.
Okay.
You're jumping ahead, but you're so exactly there because I think the whole point of having these conversations is to learn the story and learn the process and learn because you don't wake up and do this and because you obviously had a successful career before, how you get here. But first, just tell me briefly, for people that don't know, what Urban Possibilities does, what it's about, what your mission is.
Well, we teach homeless job seekers and low-income workers the tools to reach their highest potential. And our approach is inside out. And why that is because success is an inside job. It's really born out of what we think, what we believe, which dictates how we act. What we believe about ourselves and the world dictates everything. So there are so many forces that lead to someone becoming homeless or people living in poverty. There are so many circumstances, so many systemic forces that cause that to happen. And so what I realized is that the person that's being affected, if they are empowered, they can begin to navigate all of those barriers themselves. If they have the tools, then they can transcend. But most of the time, not only people who have lived in poverty, but so many people don't know what the tools are to transcend. Right? They don't think about how we think or how our brain works or what are some of the building blocks for success that we have total control over, that we are already equipped with. We're born with it, just like we're born with the noses on our face. So we are an empowerment company. And I know that word's been overused, but it really is. How do we build power specifically and particularly with marginalized populations? And how do we do that from the inside out?
Beautiful. And I don't know if you know this, but I've spent, and I don't know exactly where you guys are located, but I've spent about 15 years in Watts. Bourbon Day, I've chaired the board of Bourbon Day High School, and I've spent a lot of time at 112th Street, 112th and Central, and I've spent a lot of time in Nickerson Gardens, and I've seen the beautiful, amazing people and the journeys and the struggles. And what happens when you're given a pole and not a fish.
Right. Or not a pole at all. Right.
Exactly.
And
I've seen all of it. Right.
People want you to fish with no pole, no net.
Right.
And if you say, hey, I don't have a pole and a net, then it's not acknowledged.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah, so I'm a kid from the south side of Chicago, so I'm an inner city product myself. And so I understand the oppressive is too light a word, but the suffocation that comes with that kind of systemic racism, those kinds of forces that tell you all the time that we are a society that is still separate but not equal. Right? Where you go to an underperforming school, where the expectations for who you are and who you can be is always diminished.
And predetermined almost in a way.
Predetermined, diminished.
The script is written and handed to children of inner city circumstances, and they just take it because they don't have any other script.
Right. They don't have any. Well, the difference for me and my family was that I had a really strong family. And when my family migrated from the South, they all lived within a couple of houses sometimes or blocks close to each other. Right. So I had an unusual upbringing in a community where I saw tragedy all the time. Mm-hmm. I saw the loss of hope all the time. And that still exists today on the south side of Chicago. Right?
Totally. Probably. It's almost probably worse now than it was when you grew up.
Yeah. I think now the difference is that there is starting to be a greater awakening, which has been a very long time coming.
Oh, yeah.
And so with that awakening, we want to be able to change narratives. We want to be able to have people evolve their thinking about marginalized communities, Black and brown people, what the potential for Black and brown people is. And I guess the other thing that's always been a shining light, too, is that we always have that rose through the concrete, right? We see it all the time. Right. There's Oprah, right, who was incredibly poor, and look at her now.
Right.
Right?
The world superhero. She's our superhero.
I mean, we have
She's mine.
So many examples of that. So many examples of people who were homeless, who have gone on to achieve. And so what we want to do is take those elements that those people exhibit,
right,
and be able to teach that. And that's what we do in a curriculum. So people begin to see how they're equipped, what it takes, be inspired to see beyond their circumstances, be able to look past their failures and their limiting beliefs, and then really have some concrete practical tools that they can use to ascend. And so when I started this, I just had this idea. I didn't know how I was going to do it. But
so were you in, like, what was the moment? Like when most people can say, like, this happened and boom, almost everyone I've talked to can tell you the moment where they're like,
right,
I have to act. I have to do something. They don't know what that moment means, but they know that they have hit a landmine and they must act. So what was that moment like for you? Give me the story.
So I think that it started, I'm the daughter of a community activist. So I was on picket lines at the age of 4. So this is
well trained.
Yeah. This has been a long time coming, but the event that really opened things up for me to begin Urban Possibilities was I was covering a story for Essence magazine. And they used to have an annual special, an award show.
I remember that.
And this was, I think, their last year. And so they really wanted to make a statement. And so the centerpiece of the show, they hired me to produce that. And it was really, the foundation for it was, during that time, murder was the leading cause of death for Black men 18 and over. And so they wanted to shine a light on that and what that costs our community. So I profiled 4 women. I traveled to them, and this is for a roll-in tape piece for a show. So I traveled to them, and their stories just opened me up wide. So when I first arrived, the first city I was in to cover a story was in Charlotte. And in Charlotte, there was a woman who was receiving an Essence Award who her daughter had been murdered. And so she started an organization called Mothers of Murdered Offspring. And so when your child is murdered, you are in such shock, you don't function well. So her organization comes in to help you process, to do the things that need to be done. So we arrived there, and our first stop was a grade school that their kindergarten teacher was killed in front of the school. And so there is a balloon release for kindergartners, right, to help them process that. Now, this is my first shoot of the day. I've got a full day ahead of me. This is the first shoot. And when those balloons went up, those students, 3, 4, 5 years old, became hysterical. So my crew and I are shooting and scooping up kids, right, who are hysterical. So that was stop 1. Then we get a call that there is going to be a candlelight vigil for a family where 3 of the members of the family had been murdered. And on the front lawn of their home, this organization was doing a candlelight vigil. So we go there, and it's probably about 200 or 300 people on this lawn. Wow. People just in such grief, right, about what has happened to this family, their neighbors. And first of all, I saw that no news crews came, right? There was no coverage of this story, right? And then, but here's the thing that really got me too, was I looked around this circle of all these people in tears, children in tears, all ages, just grieving so the loss of this family. And when I looked around, there were some people, especially some of the Black men in this group, who just looked like their lights were turned out. Like, I have traveled to other places where there has been war, and there is a certain blankness that you see.
Right.
And I saw that blankness there, and it hit me so hard. And then as I looked around, so I'm looking through that lens, and then I also see that there are people who this isn't surprising to them, right? So
right.
I asked some of the people as the candlelight vigil as they were putting out their candles, and so I asked some of those who are really organizers in the community, I asked them, so what are you guys going to do? How are you going to mobilize? And they said, mobilize? Nobody's coming. Nobody cares. Nobody, tomorrow it could be me. And so there was just such a low expectation
right.
for their community that I understood because I had been born into a community like that too. So the aha moment that I had was that we have a lot of crises in the inner city. There's education, there's employment, there's healthcare, right? But one of the crises that I felt needed to be addressed was a deep crisis of self-esteem. A crisis of having to combat the effects of racism so day in and day out that it's like the air you breathe. And that if people were empowered, they would expect more of their community, they would expect more of their officials, they would get more engaged and involved. But if you believe that tomorrow it could be you, and you've been shown over and over that nobody cares and nobody's coming,
right,
then your expectations align with that. And so when I got back, it's so interesting because I didn't start Urban Possibilities right away. When I got back.
What year was this trip for this award? You were producing this.
It was like 10 years ago.
Right. Okay. Wow.
So, when I got back, I thought, okay, I'm going to seek out work and do a lot more stories about the inner city. That's what I thought I was going to do. But in this story, I covered 4 mothers, one here in Los Angeles, who 2 of her children had been murdered in South Central. And so when I got back, I was talking to all of them because after the award show, there were celebrities that gave them donations to their causes, right? Mm-hmm. And so they were so excited, and I had done this story, so I was the natural person for them to talk to, and we had connected on such a deep level because they had to relive for me the trauma of losing their children for my story. Right. And we had become deeply connected as a result of that. And so I was talking to one of the moms, and she was so excited. And she said, I wish I could spend this money on what they look like. The clothes that they wear when they go for job interviews. She was doing a job prep program for ex-offenders. And so she said, I really wish I could spend the money on that, right? Because they're turned away before they even get in the door because of what they look like.
What they look like, right.
Right, how they're dressed.
Mm-hmm.
And so I said to her, being the producer that I am, right?
I can solve any problem. Producers can solve any problem. Give me a problem and I will solve it.
That's right.
And I will do it quickly and efficiently.
Do it in a commercial break, right? So I said, here's what you should do. I said, you should start collecting business clothing, and so that you can dress them and teach them how to dress. And you should call it, her program was for men only. And I said, and you should call it Suited for Success and be the counterpart to Dress for Success. I said, just imagine, I'm painting this picture for her. Just imagine what you can do when they're dressed appropriately and people are teaching them about that. And she listened to me very patiently. And then she said to me, she said, no, I think that's what you're supposed to do.
And did you feel a lightning bolt and like
I did.
The hand of God coming down?
It was like this hot poker went all through me.
Yes.
And I got off the phone and I started crying. But here, even then, this is how sometimes your destiny, you don't see it because you have another plan in mind.
Right.
So I got off the phone and I started crying and I had no idea why. So I'm perplexed, like, why am I crying over what she said? I don't understand. What is this?
Because you're about ready to become in the nonprofit space. That's why you're crying. You're leaving the sex world of TV and you're going to another realm. That is why, imagine.
I know, that'll bring tears. So I mentioned it to a couple of people at work, and at the time I was working on the Paramount lot, and I mentioned it to a couple of people, and it got to some wardrobe people, and then a show went down, and they had wardrobe. And next thing I know, they're calling me saying, we heard about this thing that you're doing. Now, it was a thought. It wasn't something I had begun. And they said, we heard about this thing you're doing, and we want to donate some wardrobe. So I was like, okay, so I guess I got to find some place for this wardrobe to go. So I got in touch with one of the shelters here.
Right.
And started a relationship where I started donating clothes, because then the word spread like wildfire. Like, there's this television producer and she's doing this thing with clothing. And we work in the Skid Row community. That's been where we've been.
Okay.
And so next thing I know, this thing just took off. People were calling me. Companies. I had people who worked in corporate America who started.
Was it Suited for Success? Is that what you called it? Did you call it?
That's what we called it. Yeah. We called it Suited for Success.
And did you get a 501c3 with that or not at that point?
You know, we joined an organization we're still with called Community Partners, which is a consortium of nonprofits.
Right.
And so our 501c3 is with them. They've been so amazing for us from the time it was an idea into my head to really sticking with us through how this has evolved. So I know this is a long story.
No, but it's fantastic.
So I started doing this, and at the time I was dating, right? I was dating, and so my boyfriend at the time, he got involved, and we were doing this. So on the weekends and on hiatus, I'm doing this clothing thing. Corporations are starting to have clothing drives for us. We need trucks to take the clothes. We're doing all of this. And then what stuck out for me was that sometimes we would do these clothing events where people who were looking for work, we would bring clothing and a mirror and dress them. And so people would come in heads bowed, depressed. The energy would be so low in the room.
Right.
And then when we started to dress people, all of a sudden the noise level would get high, and people, men included, men and women, walking around like peacocks and laughing. And, you know, then it turns into a party. And I started to see this happen. And then when we would pack up, it's like somebody turned that light out, right? And it would just go right back to the way it was. So I became obsessed with, how do you keep that light on? What is it that keeps that light on within someone so that they can begin to transcend that moment?
And how far in were you into your journey with the clothing when you kind of had this epiphany and decided you were going to maybe pivot a little bit?
Probably about 5 years, because I was doing this while I was working full time.
Right.
And I was doing it on hiatus and on weekends, and then it just started to really mushroom. Right. But I was watching this phenomenon about how there is this thing that happens. And at the same time, I was working in daytime TV, and I was also a sweeps producer. And one of the things
you had nothing going on there, right? You were just, slacking there with 3 jobs, running a nonprofit. Right. Holy
guacamole. One of the things that always rates in sweeps at the time, it still probably does, is a makeover. And so I was this makeover queen, right? And even though makeovers are more work than usual.
I love a good makeover, by the way.
I know. Who doesn't love a good makeover?
I mean, really? It's the best.
It's the best.
It's the best.
And so even though it was as a producer, it was much more work, the payoff was so huge, right? And so I'm doing this thing on the side, and then I'm doing makeovers a lot. Not totally, but a lot. And some of the people that I had made over kept in touch because that makeover sparked a huge change in their life. They lost massive weight. They went back to school. They put out their son out of the basement finally, right? They did things that were someday, one day, and it became right now. So that's germinating in my head too, right?
Love that.
This how people see an image of themselves that can catalyze them into a new way of life. And
I'm using this, by the way, someday, one day became right now. That is good stuff right there. Love that. Sorry.
Oh, good. Okay.
That's
so, so I'm doing that. And then at the same time, we're doing these makeovers, not full makeovers, but clothing for inner city populations. And I'm watching this light go off. And so I decided to hold a class and to really just put into that class at a shelter. It was for men only and I wanted the folks in the shelter they considered the worst, because if I was going to do this and test this theory, I wanted to have that kind of student.
Right.
And to challenge me, and so that I can challenge them, and we could really test this premise that I had. And so we had this class, and it was remarkable. Remarkable. It was with men only who opened up in such a profound way that were so courageous and looking at their past and so open to learning about the tools that can move their lives forward.
Right. Because no one had probably ever even acknowledged them, looked them in the eye, bet on them, given them anything, any of the things, not even just the makeover, but just the attention and the conversation and the dignity of just a conversation about, that in itself, for someone who's so shut down, is eye-opening. On the receiving end, like, oh my gosh, they're paying attention to me, they're talking to me, they want to know what I think.
Not only what I think, but they're showing me things about myself that I didn't know existed, right? They're showing me that how I think determines what I believe and how I act, and that I'm the master of that, and I can change that.
Right.
That my past does not dictate my future.
Right.
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 And giving me tools so that I can apply that in my everyday life.
Wow.
So it was so amazing. And because I'm a producer, I love a good show. So how our program works is that it's a 12-week program.
So that's when Urban Possibilities began. That was the boom.
Yeah.
That's all right. I need to get that one little piece in there.
Yeah.
So that's that was the beginning. And what year what did you kind of rename and switch over?
Yeah, I renamed and switched over like 7 years ago. So that initial, I'll have to look and give you the date for that initial when I first started and did that Essence Award was probably 15 years ago.
Wow. Okay.
Right. And so 7 years ago, so then I became so just swept up in that.
It's addictive, isn't it?
It's so addictive.
As my husband says, Heidi, if you were a shopaholic, it would be so much easier for me than you trying to save the world. It is so much harder and so much more expensive and so never ending. Right. Could you have picked any other hobby, any other passion? I'm like, sorry, no, it picked me. I did. Sorry,
I know that conversation well, right? Yeah, I know that feeling well.
So tell me. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, so that's when I decided, we had done so much with the clothing, but because I really wanted people to look at themselves externally and let that call to a greater thought about themselves. But then what I realized is that we got to do the real work is to do the internal work so that then they can navigate all the barriers they have to overcome. And trust me, it's Herculean.
Right.
When you are homeless or if you live in inner city communities, to be able to achieve is sometimes Herculean.
Absolutely. So what challenges did you face as you decided to pivot? And I mean, as we said earlier, the natural makeup of a nonprofit is loaded with them. It comes ripe with challenges. But what challenges did you face as you were doing this? I mean, obviously you had to make a decision about your career.
That was the big one.
I mean, that sounds like a doozy.
Well, can I tell you a little personal story about that?
Please.
So remember when I was telling you I was dating, right?
Yes.
I had a boyfriend that was helping me.
Right.
Well, that boyfriend became my husband.
Oh, nice choice. Always marry a helper. Always marry a helper. Good pick.
And so I had fought a long time. I worked in network television, and there weren't a lot of black women in network television. So I had fought a long time to get to the place where I was. And so giving it up that was really hard.
Well, it's your identity.
Yeah, it was that, and it was really feeling like that I just worked really hard for it, right? And I just didn't want to give up something I'd worked that hard for, that I'd sacrificed for like that. And so I used that for a while as my excuse not to jump all in, right? So I did it on the side, Urban Possibilities on the side for a long time. So then my husband now, he asked me one day, so what would it take, you think, for you to be able to do Urban Possibilities full time, right? And I blamed it on money. I blamed it on a lot of things. And he said, I'll take care of all of that. Like, go do your dream. And so he took my excuses away. So I had to jump all in because
you're going to make me cry here again, Vic, because I love that, because that's what good men do, right? That's what good men do.
Yeah.
I mean, I get that. I get that. I mean, yeah, I've walked that walk, and my husband's like, you have to do this. Like, there's no, when the lightning bolt hits, there's really no turning back. Like, you know.
Right.
And call it a calling, call it whatever you want, call it divine intervention, but and almost every person I've interviewed has had, not all have had lightning bolts, but many of them have. And many of them, myself included, just had, it was such a clear moment in our lives when we knew we had to pivot and do something.
Right.
And there's no other option. It's just like a non-negotiable moment. And you're like, but wait, I have this plan.
Right.
No, whatever that does not care about your plan, there is a bigger one. There is a bigger one, and it is coming down the pike, and you are in front of it, and you are, it's time, and it's just, you're called, and there you are. And it changes everything.
Changes absolutely everything.
Everything.
So,
but it is rewarding. Well, it is. And, and I say no one gets into this work for the money. No one.
Right.
No one.
Right.
And I interviewed earlier this week the CEO of Project Hope, which is a global, ginormous nonprofit and, humanitarian relief all over the world. And he was a civil engineer, and he was like, oh no, I just got called on vacation to kind of help this little cholera outbreak. And I thought, oh, well, I've got nothing to do. I'll just go help out. He's like, and I was going to stay for a week. And 9 years later, there I was on this island in Sierra Leone. He's like, that was not the plan. I was a civil engineer. Right. You're like, I'm a TV producer. Don't you understand?
Right. That was exactly
not the plan. This is not
the plan. But, when you start to answer that call, what I found, and maybe you know this from interviewing people too, but this is what happened for me, is that there is a synchronicity that begins to show up in your life.
Oh, yeah.
That puts your life in a whole different energy stratosphere.
Yep.
Right? You're at the grocery store and you're thinking about, so how am I going to find someone to whatever it is, a new writing instructor. And then somebody turns and where you are in the grocery store, introduces themselves, and there it is, right?
I mean, I could tell you a million stories like that, but when I started a nonprofit in 2003 that provides chaplains of all faiths at Children's Hospital, and my parents, it's a long story, but my parents were in a horrible car accident. My mother was killed. My parents' best friends were all killed. My dad was in a coma. 8 people, 4 couples. Everybody lost a spouse. I was 35, and it was like that phone call that changes everything. And my children were fine and fantastic and nothing to do with the accident, but I was called to Children's Hospital, and short story long, my friend was the only chaplain, and he asked me if I would help him start a nonprofit to provide chaplains of all faiths at CHLA. And so I was like, there was a moment where I was struck by lightning in the hospital that I knew. We met a patient who was going home Thanksgiving Day. My father went home from his coma Thanksgiving Day, and I felt it, and I knew it in that moment, and I was called, and I was like, okay, I have young kids. I have a career on hold. This is not the plan, but I'm in. Okay. I'm in. And I blame it on my mother. God rest your soul, Mom, but I blame it on her sometimes. And, puppeteering from above. And I was, decided that we were going to have a fundraiser called Field of Dreams long before, it's 2003, long before anyone was doing this, by the way. And I was in the grocery store. I was in the grocery store, and I see this woman who I knew from a baby playgroup thing I hadn't seen in years. And she said, what are you doing? I said, I'm starting some nonprofit, and we have this baseball field that we're borrowing, and we're going to have this Field of Dreams benefit. And she's like, oh, well, how can I help you? And I said, oh, well, what do you want to do? She's like, well, I'm Kevin Costner's assistant.
Whoa.
What? Like, you can't make this stuff up. So, right? So I have lived it. I have lived it on a million levels, and it is a wild ride.
Well, one of the things, our mission is really twofold. It's to help homeless job seekers and low-income workers. But the other part of our mission is really to evolve the thinking of the public, right? In a couple of ways. And one of them is so that we can change the conversation and get rid of some of these narratives that are old and no longer exist about who homeless men and women are. You know, all those things we've heard, they choose it, they're all drug addicts.
Right. All of
you
that.
know, they're all mentally ill, you name it.
Yeah.
All the negative stereotypes are dumped
right.
onto homeless men and women, and also inner city men and women get a lot of that too. So part of it is to evolve those narratives where you can begin to understand the issues, understand where that stuff comes from, and also meet some of the people you may have had stereotypes about.
Right.
And the other part is to really inspire people to become their own activists. And part of that is because you and I both know that when you use your gifts to help someone else find theirs or to help a problem, there is something that happens in your life you can't get in any other way.
It's the best drug there is.
Ever.
It is, and it is addictive stuff. It is addictive. It is badly, wickedly addictive.
Yeah, but I think that part of our cause is really to help people begin to expand their lives in that way, to be inspired to be expanded. So we've had volunteers who say that this work has changed their lives, right? Somebody who maybe they were caught up in their corporate job or whatever it is, and it felt a little hollow and empty. And then you begin to use your talents and gifts for something bigger than yourself, and things shift. And so I want people to be inspired to understand the power they have for change. And so I've started a podcast.
I love that. Me too. You're on.
Yeah. So I've started a podcast. It's Eyvette's Urban Possibilities podcast, but it's really to be able to do all of those things, to inspire, to entertain, to be able to educate people, but really to get them to see themselves in a bigger and maybe a new light, right? Because a lot of people see issues and they say, oh, but what can I do? Right? Everybody can do something.
Amen.
Everybody can do something.
So I always say, sometimes the bucket is heavy doing this. There's not a lot of people to carry the bucket with you. We have communities and we build communities, but at the end of the day, it's not like you're just trying to make a TV show, not just, but you have human beings that are on your back when you go to bed at night. Then you feel the weight of that responsibility that is not like any other responsibility. Right. And it's hard just to say, oh, here, honey, could you hold this for a second? It doesn't work like that.
No.
So when the bucket is heavy, when your back is heavy with just how can I serve more, help more, do more, there's not enough hours in the day. What are those moments that fuel you to keep going forward?
Well, one of the things I do is I look at the letters sometimes that I've received from students, or I call students who, may have been just in the worst place or suicidal. We have a lot of folks who are suicidal that come into our program who are now paying it forward in big ways. Mm-hmm. And so I call them and I talk to them. I'm a spiritual person, so I go within. And I know that this is what I was born to do. So I thought television was, because I love storytelling, I thought television, like that was it for me. But what I found was that it was just the precursor to this. It was the launching pad to this. It wasn't the end game.
Right.
So for me, in our program, we have a 12-week program, and students graduate by performing a piece that they've created on stage. Now we're going to do virtual performances. And then we also publish their work in a book. And following the performances, we always had book signings. So I look at that, too. I look at those performances. I look at the comments from people who attended the performances, who thought, oh, I'm going to go to this performance to, support. And they end up having some revelation for themselves, right? Mm-hmm. And then they write me about it. And they're from all walks of life. So I'm lucky in that regard because I can reach out to the students we've helped.
Right.
And I can look at video. I can read letters.
Right.
But I think the other thing is I know I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing.
Oh, yes, you are. For sure about that.
Well,
so I hate this word, and I say this all the time. I have a love-hate relationship with this word that is deep. The word is impact because we live and die by it with the nonprofit world, and why I love having goals and making donors feel that we're a great investment and that all those great things are happening. Measuring love. I run a leadership organization. Measuring leadership, measuring personal transformation. It's hard to measure that impact. So to me, impact isn't really about necessarily numbers or dollars raised or people served, but for some people it is. So what do you think? It could be a story. What do you think if you could say what your impact is? What would you say your impact is as an organization? It doesn't have to be qualitative or quantitative. It doesn't matter. It's whatever you think it is.
Well, I mean, when we look at the numbers, then 75% of our students, after they've graduated, are either working or in school. Awesome. So these are people who lived under bridges, on bus stops, in their cars, at shelters. Wow. But the biggest impact I think we have is that part of our program is also, when we talk about the tools of success, is how do you give? How do you make a personal impact? And so we have students who were formerly addicts who are now drug and rehab counselors. They're paying it forward. Mm-hmm. We have people who lived under a bridge who now have reunited with their family and working and have their kids in private school. We have people who are looking at starting nonprofits of their own so that they can reach out to people that they were once like. I think our biggest impact is graduating people that not only understand at a deep level their self-worth, they understand now that they are gifted in whatever way that is, and then they are applying those gifts in the world, not based on somebody else's idea of success, but what internally for them. Like, we all come here with a gift to give. We all come here with work to do. So the thing is, how do you get all the other stuff out of the way so that you can apply your gift, right? That you can self-actualize. And that's what we're really about. I mean, self-actualizing doesn't sound sexy when you talk about it, that word, but that's what we are doing. We are helping people understand how you begin to self-actualize so that you bring that to the world, not just, some training, which is great. Right. But how do you begin to bring yourself and your unique gifts to the world and pay it forward? So seeing our students do that, that's the true impact that I think we bring.
And I'm going to have you read your poem at the very end of our conversation, because it's going to be the last thing that I want to hear is your students' words. But because I think it's going to be the most beautiful way to end our conversation, which we still have 2 more questions.
Okay.
So don't think I haven't forgotten about that, because I do want to hear it desperately. But that's going to be like the cherry on the top. So what life lessons have you learned since you started down this path 15 some odd years ago, from filming you're a producer and you're filming this awards series, and all of a sudden here you are today. What life lessons have you learned?
Well, there are so many, right?
I'm sure there's a book in there about.
Yeah. I'm writing a book, as a matter of fact.
I bet you are, and you should be. Yeah. I want to sign one. I'm buying it.
But some of the biggest lessons that I learned are to say yes when you hear the call, no matter what that may look like. It may not be what you thought your carefully plotted future may be. But when you say yes to the call, it opens the true adventure of your life.
Amen.
Right? Yeah. So I've learned that. I've learned that if you have a vision that comes from deeply within, that some people are going to get it and some people aren't, and that's okay. Right? To hold fast to your vision, keep your vision in front of you. I've learned from my students a different kind of resilience, because their resilience, their transcendence called to my own in a way I never imagined. So I learned that. But I've learned so many things.
So how do you think you've changed?
Well, that's a big question too. Mm-hmm. How have I changed? Well, the entire orientation of my life has changed. I'm not chasing the next show, the next job, the next assignment. My focus is no longer primarily on myself and my career and what I can achieve. It is, I've hooked myself to something bigger, and that has changed everything. How else have I changed? I'm a lot, I was always pretty good under pressure, but I'm a lot calmer now. I have a lot more emotional fortitude, because I was a person that when my students would come and they would write about things, and I would take their homework and I would cry, right? Because of sometimes the cruelty they had faced, for no other reason than being born in the skin they're in the community they're in the family they're in. Whatever those things were. And so I still cry, but I'm stronger emotionally, because I've had to hold a space for people to be able to lay down some of their burden as they pick up a new way of being. So, I think that's one of the ways I've changed. And I know what I know.
You know a lot, my friend. You know a lot. You are a wise woman. And you are my soul sister. You are my people. I mean, you are speaking to me in beautiful and deep, incredible ways that have just touched my soul. And I'm just so grateful.
Here's one of the other things, and this part of what I want to do in the podcast too, is that I want people to understand what you and I have felt, that transcendent joy. Mm-hmm. Like there's nothing like that transcendent joy. And it doesn't take starting a nonprofit to feel that way.
No.
Even though that was our call.
Right.
but other people can do that too. And I think I've become, one of the ways it's changed me is being bolder and trying to call that forth in other people. Right? Before people would say, oh, well, I'm too busy and, my career and it's not that thing. And I would say, I totally get it. I understand. Right? And now I really stand in a place where I want to call something else out to you. You can choose it or not, but I really am an advocate for the expansion that happens when people start to spend their energy and their time really going after something big, like changing the world.
Like changing the world, one person at a time, my friend, one person at a time.
Yeah.
So tell me, where can we support you, find you, your podcast, your Instagram, full shout out for everything, Eyvette. Where can we get your book? When can we get?
Well, the book's not published yet. It's coming. I'm still writing it. And, it's interesting. The book is going to be a series of stories based on my student stories and what I learned from them, those big lessons I got from those stories. But urbanpossibilities.org is our website. We have Urban Possibilities Facebook page. We have an Instagram account. The podcast you'll be able to find on the website.
Okay. Love that.
I think that's it right now.
So I think you should close us out by reading us one of your students' pieces of work and I don't have Kleenex handy, which I'm going to regret.
No. This is uplifting. This is
okay. But boy, a couple of those have just gutted me. They're so beautiful, but whoa.
Right. Well, when you go to the depths of your soul, big stuff comes out.
Big stuff.
So this one is, I just want to give the context for this piece a little bit. And it was by a guy who was a senior accountant at a Fortune 500 company. Lived in the suburbs, 2 cars in the garage, homeowner, owned property, gave to charity every year, and he was downsized. And when he was downsized, then he shortly thereafter became divorced. And he just didn't get traction. He didn't get hired as quickly as he thought he would be. And so he ended up homeless. Not only homeless, but incredibly angry because he, like many people, thought this should never happen to him, how unfair this was. He didn't grow up in the inner city. He didn't commit a crime, any of those things. So when he came to our class, he was extremely angry. And when he started writing, because our class is empowerment lessons, but you also write about what that lesson is, how it applies to you. And that's the work that they perform. That's why it goes so deep, right? And so when he came to the class, he was so shut down and suicidal that when it was time in the class to write, he would write a couple of words and stop. And then when he got to a full sentence, this is after week, and he got to a full sentence, the whole class cheered, right? He got to a sentence. And then after that, he just uncorked. And he became a different person, right? He saw himself differently. What he could achieve was different. And so I wanted to give you that story because this is one of the pieces that he wrote. And he's a first-time writer. And it's called Snowflakes. We are all snowflakes, black, white, yellow, brown, male, female, all shapes, all colors, all sizes. Not one of us alike, never was and never will be. Everyone passes this way only once, faded, to fade away. Our voices, echoes in the canyon, others may hear, but usually won't. What are we to make of this, our last and only chance? Alone we melt, dissolve into nothingness, vapor and mist, never to be seen again. But together, packed tight, the sun cannot melt us. We change the world around us. We become an entire continent. Waves pass by us. Polar bears walk on us. Together, we reflect back the sun. We are a blinding light. Together, we shine. We can't allow ourselves to fall like raindrops, alone and uncounted, doomed to dissolve into mist. Together, we stand against centuries of oceans' tides and change the face of the world.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Charity Matters podcast. I really enjoyed talking to our guest today, Eyvette Jones-Johnson, about what it takes to start a business that changes people's lives. I think her comment about wanting people to feel the transcendent joy that we feel as nonprofit founders was so inspiring and true. To learn more about these modern day heroes and entrepreneurs, or if you'd like to reach out to us, visit us at charity-matters.com or connect with us on Instagram at Charity Matters. If you enjoyed our conversation, we would love this if you shared it with your friends and family. Remember, together we can make a difference, one small act of kindness at a time.